The agenda this week considered China's financial and diplomatic future. We reflected on a life spent helping others and debated the disparity between female academic and career success. The agenda's week in review begins with a region rife with turmoil. I'm going to read an excerpt from a piece you wrote a few months ago that really stood the foreign policy world on its head because it was so critical. Here's what you said. The Obama team lacks the basic instincts and judgment necessary to conduct U.S. national security policy in the next 2 years. It's simply too dangerous to let Mr. Obama continue as is with his current team and his way of making decisions. America, its allies, and friends could be heading into one of the most dangerous periods since the height of the Cold War. I don't read those remarks to remind you of how tough you were a few months ago, except to say you're not known as being a kind of a rash guy who writes a cheap hit to get a headline, but that was pretty tough stuff. How come you wrote that?
I hated to do it. I really did. It bothered me a lot to do it. But I felt he's got 2 more years to go. President Obama's got 2 more years to go. And the situations in various parts of the world really are scary. And with his present team, he's not going to be able to get it done. There's too much loss of confidence around the world of our partners and too little fear by our enemies. And with 2 years left to go, I wanted him to take a look at rejuggling his team because he needs a more experienced crew to put together the kinds of strategies I'm talking about. That's where our leadership really has to come from.
Do the changes that you want require a new team or a new president?
There's not going to be a new president. He's a plenty smart guy. It's not a question of how smart he is. It's a question of his instincts for putting together a workable strategy. He never had much experience as an executive, either for internal affairs or external. And then he was thrown into a very difficult set of situations, and he didn't perform so great. His predecessor was even worse. So we've had a stretch of 2 presidents facing problems that are severe without the kinds of abilities and without the teams necessary to cope with those situations.
Well, let me go down the checklist again, and I'll get you to weigh in briefly on each situation, and you can tell me whether you think they did right or made a mistake. Did the administration pull troops out of Iraq too quickly?
Maybe a little too quickly. I think we should have kept some troops there. But look, this issue comes up all the time, and it's a very fair question. Look, we were there for almost 8 years. We spent billions and billions of dollars training and arming the Iraqi forces. Who trained and armed ISIS? Who trained and armed the jihadis? Did General Petraeus train them? Did the United States arm them? They started from scratch. And yet the guys we had for 8 years didn't do the job. As soon as they faced the battle in Mosul, they threw away their arms and they ran. Now, if we stayed there 10 more years, we're not going to be able to fix that problem. It's up to the Iraqis to decide whether or not they feel they've got something worth fighting for and whether their leaders know how to lead them in battle.
All right,
it didn't happen. It didn't happen.
We'll move to another country then. How about Libya? The administration got involved. Gaddafi is dead. Was that all a mistake?
Absolutely. It was dumb because anyone who thought that just getting rid of Gaddafi was going to bring about a more stable democratic situation in Libya knows nothing about life or about Libya. If you knew anything about Libya, you knew you cut off that head and you would have chaos. What did we do? We cut off Gaddafi's head. We had the military power to do that. And the place fell apart. And if you had any background there, you would have seen that. But we had this unusual combining of conservatives and humanitarian Democrats to want to bring democracy to Libya, and they didn't think it through. And the consequence is the chaos in Libya and the dangerous Libya you now see.
Was the administration's response to the Arab Spring appropriate in your view?
No, because it takes not a few years to change countries into democracies. It takes decades and decades. You have to change the underlying political culture. You got to change the laws. You've got to create civil society. You've got to create a basis for democracy. Because otherwise, if you just lop off the dictator and hold an election the next day, who wins? The best organized group wins. And who are the best organized groups in the Arab countries? It's the radicals. It's the Muslim Brotherhood. It's the crazies in Libya. So we saw that in Gaza Strip when Bush did it, and we saw it in Egypt. That's what happens if you go from dictatorship to elections. It takes time. We did it right in South Korea, in Taiwan, and Turkey, but it took decades to get that job done and to change from military dictatorships to more or less pretty good democracies.
Let me move you to Syria then. Once President Assad crossed the red line that President Obama laid down for him, in other words, don't use chemical weapons or else, and then he did, and then there was no or else, what then?
Well, then he needed a strategy, as I said. And in that situation, the beginning of strategy is to ask yourself the question, what's the most serious threat we face in this hellhole? The administration and others, France in particular, or Britain, they were all fixated on that bad guy Assad because he was so bad. And their preoccupation with him alone meant that we didn't begin to realize how serious a threat ISIS would be. And all of a sudden, a year or so later, they became what we see today. And they refused to make hard and fast decisions about that threat. So we sort of helped the Sunni rebels inside Syria, but we didn't help them very much. We broke off relations with Assad, but yet we were sort of closing one eye to working with him in the fight against ISIS. We had our big ally, our NATO ally, Turkey, on the borders there, in effect helping ISIS. It was a total mess. So there never was a strategy. And one day we're working with Assad and with the Iranians against ISIS, and the next day we're condemning them and telling them to get out of the fight. Everyone is totally confused in an incredibly dangerous situation.
Rwanda, after the '94 genocide. You're there, you're traveling to Zaire, you're on the border. Let's bring up this picture here. Here is a picture of a boy named, is it Gasore? Is that how he says his name?
Gasore, yeah.
Gasore.
He was 4 years old.
How did you meet him?
Well, I was at the end of my time. This is in the old Zaire, and the refugees. These are people who had fled Rwanda, thinking there would be retribution against them, and it was a kind of a hell on earth place. We were doing relief work, and it was sort of my last day, and I wanted to go to one other major camp that had something almost close to 100,000 people in it, I think. And I wanted to go, and we were driving down the road, and all of a sudden, he looked like, he was so malnourished, he looked like E.T. from the movie. He was just skin and bones. And he was just walking, plodding along the road. We stopped, and our translator was with us, and he got out, because I thought we would scare him, because we were all, I guess, mostly white people. And so he got out and started, and we discovered this little boy. His parents had died. He wasn't sure when. He hadn't had anything to eat for 3 days, I think he said, and he'd had no water for at least a day. All I had in the car was a half a Coke can. I remember he almost ate the thing. He was so thirsty. We took him back, got him some food, looked after him, and then we had a group of other children that we had collected at World Vision that were just children that came out of sort of nowhere. And I was able to see him a couple of times, and he was kind of a moment, a very precise moment where you're able to do something very specific, which we all love, something very tangible, and you feel like you're making a difference in the middle of something that was just unthinkable. In that location, in the beginning days, We were feeding people on one plot of the land, and then adjacent to us we had 160 dead bodies lying in the sun, and we couldn't get them buried. So you're providing food here and dead people laying over here from cholera, all sorts of just untreated disease of one kind or another. And so Gisori was a positive experience for me and really meant a lot. Now, unfortunately, there's a bit of a sad thing to this, because eventually the children we had were joined with other children, and an organization was looking after orphans specifically. And there was a lot of military conflict going on in that area. And probably about a year and a half or 2 years later, it was overrun. Huge amount of killing, and I've lost Gisori. I can't find him.
You don't know where he is now?
I've had staff looking for him. We don't know. I just don't know if he's alive or not. I choose to believe that I hope he is.
But you met him more than 20 years ago and stayed in touch with him until, what, just a couple of years ago?
Oh, no. This happened within 2 years of the location. He was still just a little boy.
Ah, okay.
And this camp was overrun, and the children just ran for their lives, I'm sure.
Let's look to the east now, right near the border with Serbia. There's Srebrenica. And 20 years ago this summer, Srebrenica, if you were alive, you remember it well, was the focus of a great deal of international attention because of atrocities that took place there 20 years ago. What happened?
In 1995, Srebrenica, which was a United Nations designated safe area, one of 3 on the eastern border, it was overrun by the Bosnian Serb army in a matter of days. Srebrenica, Tuzla, and Žepa had all been designated as safe areas, which meant that they were under United Nations protection, or were meant to be, as much as such protection could exist when you have a peacekeeping force planted in the middle of an army. And these safe areas were choked off. They were isolated from the Bosnian command. They were impossible to defend. There were not adequate forces in there to defend. So these civilian populations for this 3-year period had been under siege. They were essentially being shelled and starved every day. And the situation in Srebrenica in 1995 was very dire. These enclaves in the Eastern Bloc also represented an impediment to proposed peace plans, where this territory could be given over to Bosnian Serb forces were it not for their significant Muslim populations. So in July of 1995, the Bosnian Serb army on July 6th began its push from the south into the Srebrenica enclave. And it began by shelling the Dutch observation post. So the peacekeeping forces in the battalion were the Dutch battalion known as Dutch Bat.
How did they do?
Terribly. By any accounting, the record on Dutch Bat in Srebrenica is appalling. But at that moment and at that time, they did report up their chain of command that we are under siege, our observation posts are being attacked, and we request close air support. And the Dutch battalion, in fact, in that period of time, had made 6 requests for close air support to prevent the Serb advance into Srebrenica. None of those requests were met. When finally permission was granted, by that time the NATO planes had been in the air for hours and had to turn back and refuel. So it was a complete tragedy of errors what took place in Srebrenica. Within 5 days, the Bosnian Serb army had conquered the entire enclave, and the population of not just the town but the surrounding enclave had taken refuge at the UN base in Potocari.
In fact, I think the Dutch Bat, is that what you call it?
Yes, Dutch
They were
Bat.
found responsible, right? They were found criminally responsible for much of what took place there. Is that right?
Not for much of what took place,
Some of what
but
took place.
for a very specific incident. There were Bosnian Muslims who had sought refuge on the UN base in Potocari, and they had put their name to this list, and initially it was reported as the list of 234, but the number went up to closer to 300. And what happened was, when the army came to the base, they said, "We want these men, and you have to turn them over to us." And Dutch Bat did turn them over, despite this protest, and despite the knowledge that very likely their fate is going to be quite grim. And the Dutch court has recently convicted Dutch Bat of responsibility for that, for those 300 men. And they're required to pay compensation to the families. But what the people who brought the case, the mothers of Srebrenica, what they say is, why did you make this dividing line? Why just the 300 men on the base? What about the thousands of men and boys on the other side of the base? Why don't they also have responsibility for that? And one of the things that I talk about in my book, In the Unquiet Dead, is this UN base in Srebrenica as a dividing line between life and death. If you were on the base, you were safe. If you were taken off the base, your future was certainly to be executed.
20 years later, how many of those responsible for what took place 20 years ago have been brought to justice?
Not nearly enough. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, in my opinion, has done tremendous work, very important work. There have been 161 indictments at the tribunal. They have completed most of the prosecutions. There's just a few cases left before the tribunal winds up its business. So in terms of strict numbers, obviously it's not enough because many people participated in that war. Many people were responsible for what took place at those concentration camps. The mass rape that took place in Bosnia, fewer than 40 men have been prosecuted or convicted for those rapes, which are estimated actually reported as 20,000, but estimated to be more than 40,000. So in the overall picture, it seems that justice hasn't been done. But if you look at who they've prosecuted, heads of state, heads of the army, civilian and political leaders, it has a tremendous impact. And what the tribunal has done, I think, has done away with this tradition of impunity for war crimes. So in that sense, their work is very significant, and it must continue.
Let's think about Canada and China now. And you advocate that this country needs a China strategy. And to suggest that we need it also suggests that we don't have it. Why don't we have it?
We don't have it because, and I talk about this in the book, we've been hot and cold on China over the last 10 years or so. So when the Harper government came to power, they wanted to rethink the China policy of Prime Ministers Chrétien and Martin, and I think it was time to rethink the policy. We'd come out of the Team Canada era, the time of those massive trade missions. We needed to think of something new. That was a bit tired. But I think the Harper government's reappraisal took too long. It was too public and too messy. But by 2009, he was ready to engage. The Chinese were most willing to have that happen. For about 3 years, we built the relationship suddenly. Then in early 2012, it suddenly stopped. And all communication stopped. We got on with other business. I think we thoroughly confused the Chinese. We lost our place in whatever the pecking order is.
Why did it stop?
It stopped, I think, because the government of the day did a very accurate reading of Canadian public opinion. And I think Canadian public opinion, if you look at things like the Asia Pacific Foundation, which is based in Vancouver, the polling they do of Canadian impressions of Asia, you'll see Canadians are very ambivalent about China. Only about 10% have what they would call a warm feeling about China.
In other words, we want the business, but we don't like them that much.
I also think, and you talked about this in your intro, we're stuck in a way of thinking about foreign policy that's lodged in the past, where our key interests in terms of Canadian prosperity, the economy, Canadian security, were all worked out through our relationship with the United States. China is now capable of influencing those things, not dominating them, that's still largely the US, but influencing them significantly. We don't get to choose not to engage China. China is engaging us. And unless we respond intelligently and with intelligent self-interest, we're really going to lose the opportunity to manage our side of things.
So a China strategy for you looks like what?
A China strategy for me has a couple of characteristics. In an earlier incarnation in foreign affairs, I worked on Afghanistan, and I was the secretary to what was called the Manley Panel on our future role in Afghanistan.
This is the former Deputy PM, John
former
Manley.
Deputy PM and some other very smart people like Derek Burney and Paul Tellier, Jake Epp, who were called to give
Pam
advice.
Mullen was on
and
that
Pam
too.
Mullen was on that too, to give advice to the government on how to really get the mission back on track. The key piece of advice for the Manley Panel was that the Prime Minister had to own the engagement in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was very important to us, but it is nowhere near the strategic importance of China. So I think the Prime Minister needs to own the engagement and direct it. I think Cabinet should be involved, and we should probably have a Cabinet subcommittee that looks at not the 100 things we need to get right with China, but the 3 or 4 big things that we need to get right with China. And then I think we also need to invest a lot more in research and thinking, the Australians have already done this, about the implications for Canada of China's rise. We need to be much more aware of what's happening in China and how it's having an effect, for good or for ill, on us in Canada.
The inference I also draw from your last comment is that if the Prime Minister needs to own the China policy for us to get it right, this current Prime Minister doesn't. Fair to say?
Fair to say. And I think when I say own the strategy, what I mean is I think it's time to have a conversation with Canadians. It says something like, we understand why Canadians are ambivalent about China. There are some good reasons to be ambivalent about China, because the rise of China isn't all good news for a country like Canada. It's a challenge to some of our basic values. It's a challenge to our security. But that's not a reason for not paying attention. So here's what we need to do moving forward. We're not going to sacrifice our core Canadian values, but we are going to put in place a kind of agreements and accords that a sophisticated relationship with an important country requires. And this is the way forward. If we don't have that conversation, if we kid ourselves that we can simply ignore it, we're really courting misfortune in the medium term to the long term.
As China's market economy matures and Chinese labor is no longer the cheapest available for Western manufacturers, the nation and the role it plays in the global economy is also transforming. Joining us now for more on those efforts, here's Gregory Chin. He's a political scientist at York University. Greg, it's always good to have you here at TVO.
Very happy to be back, Steve.
Thanks for coming back in. Just some numbers to get us started here. GDP by purchasing power parity. This is a big economy, $13 trillion plus. It's the second largest economy in the world, to America, of course. The GDP annual growth rate at 7.7% right now. And the GDP breaks down this way: agriculture 10%, industry almost 44%, and services 46%. That according to the CIA World Factbook. The Chinese, Greg, are calling this period of single as opposed to double-digit annual growth the new normal. And there you see what it looks like. Early 90s, through the roof, and then bouncing around a bit during the Great Recession, once again a dip down, but then responding strongly. The fact is we're not into 10, 11, 12, 13% growth rates anymore. It's sort of this new normal, 7-ish. What are the implications of that?
Yeah, well, I think what this shows us is after 3 decades of phenomenal growth, China's settling in, probably for the next decade, to somewhere between 7%, maybe 6% growth. I think overall, as you mentioned, Steve, the overall size of the Chinese economy is very large now. It's the size of the German, French, and Italian economies combined. So it's very difficult to continue to sustain that rapid, phenomenal growth rate that they achieved for 3 decades.
This is an economy that needs to create 25 million jobs a year.
Exactly. That's right. Now, as they move into a more mature stage of the economy, where they're not filling the gaps, it's very hard to sustain that growth. And so I think they're now they're shifting from quantity to quality. They're trying to move from a catch-up industrialization scenario to becoming an innovator. And so it's not easy. I think everyone realizes that China now is moving into a very challenging period.
So if you were accustomed to years and years of double-digit growth, and now, and the future, is not 7+, it's more like 5, which we'd be happy with, but with the Chinese, that's borderline recession if you're only getting 5% growth. How are the Chinese adapting to this?
Yeah, I don't think it'll fall to 5, Steve, for the foreseeable future. Already, the Central Bank of China is talking about making sure that it stays at around 7% for this year, and they do have a lot of tools. They have a surplus, they have a budget. They have the budgetary surplus, the tools to make it happen, and so they're already looking at intervening in a more robust way. And so the leader of China, President Xi Jinping, has come out, as well as the Prime Minister, saying that they will introduce more stimulus to ensure that the economy continues to grow in a strong way. And so I think, what we're seeing is that China is slowing down, but I don't think we're seeing a hard landing coming soon.
No recession, in other words.
I don't think so. I think it's normal. China's now moving into a scenario where many other countries develop. When they move from a stage of developing country to developed country, there's this kind of middle income trap. And China now is making sure, to the degree it can, to avoid that middle income trap, as we've seen elsewhere, Latin America, elsewhere. And I think China does have the tools to actually do it.
It is absolutely the case in Canada. If you compare full-time, full-year workers, men and women, we see a 20% wage gap. So that means women working the same number of hours are making 80 cents on the male dollar. And the wage gap persists even when you compare profession to profession, age group to age group. It shrinks slightly when you correct for age and occupation, but we still see a very persistent wage gap of at least, at best, 8% amongst highly educated men and women in precisely the same profession.
And do we know why?
Well, we know why some of the wage gap is occurring, at least structurally. We know that women tend to work in different occupations. So that broader 20% wage gap, part of that has to do with the fact that the female-dominated professions, things like teaching, nursing, healthcare, service industry jobs, those tend to pay less than male-dominated professions like engineering, computer science, and so on. But there's still at least 50%, economists suggest in Canada, at least 50% of the gap is unexplained. That is, even if you correct by experience, by degree, by occupation, by age, you still have this part of the wage gap that, I mean, I have to say we actually know what the explanation is. I mean, economists say it's not explained, but the explanation is discrimination.
Well, let's follow up on that. Ritu, the unexplained, quote unquote, part of the explanation. What do you think's going on?
So in my view, there's two key primary reasons that women continue to lag behind in terms of compensation and actually I'd say on a whole advancement in the legal profession and across sectors. One is the pervasiveness of gender bias and blind spots that permeate Canadian organizational culture. And then secondly, it's that women continue to be evaluated based on a corporate culture that is rooted in a white, male, straight, able-bodied normative. And so when you evaluate women based on that male normative, they will not measure up. And because of that, their compensation is less and their advancement is less.
Tamara, you're practicing law how long?
Just barely even a year. I'm a 2014 call to the bar.
You're a 2014 call to the bar. Where'd you go to school?
University of Western Ontario, or Western University, I guess now.
As it is now called.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're sort of barely with a foot in the door here. What's your
Exactly.
experience with all of what we're talking about?
Well, certainly my personal experience has actually been very good. With regards to females in this industry, I think when young lawyers project their life and what it's going to look like within 30 years or so, what they want to see is something that is sustainable. And my experience currently is sustainable.
How many lawyers at your firm?
There's 5 lawyers.
5 lawyers?
Yes.
How many women?
1, that's me.
You?
Yes. Yeah, but the partners have made a concentrated effort to integrate me into the fabric of the firm as a female lawyer. They've started to teach me about business management practices and client management, things that you don't normally see as a younger associate at some other larger firms.
Lori, how long have you been a lawyer?
28 years.
So you've more than 1 year.
Yes, more than
So
1
you've
year.
had a chance to see some of this.
Yes, I have.
How much of this is going on in Canada? This 50% unexplained.
I think it's, we know anecdotally why things happen. I agree with Ritu that there are issues that are pervasive and within the system, but I think it's also important, particularly in the legal profession, to understand that law is a business and it has a couple of different structures. Firms like Tamara's and larger firms, and both of them have their own issues that make it difficult to serve clients and be as thoughtful as they need to be about the issues that women are facing at this point.
There's a lot of reading between the lines I'm trying to do here with that answer. Ritu, do you want to do some of the reading between the lines there?
Yeah, so we're talking about compensation, right? So may I focus my comments about compensation and in particular the legal profession? Mm-hmm. So what we know is and just by way of background, I'm a lawyer by training, but I now work as a leadership and diversity consultant with Canadian law firms and global law firms. I've worked with almost every single one of the large Canadian firms. And so what I can tell you is this, that the compensation gaps are not at the entry ranks. It's not at the beginning of the journey. The compensation disparities start primarily at the senior ranks when we enter into partnership, because certainly for a lot of large Canadian law firms, there's lockstep comp in terms of salary and bonus until you become a partner.
So this is how, what, 10, 15 years in that you'd be on partner, considered for partner?
You're an associate until about year 7, and then the window for partnership opens up. It's about a 7 to 10 year window depending on the size of the firm and their structure.
And that's when the disparity begins.
It's when you become a partner.
Okay.
And so it's the partner compensation, where we see the disparities. And the problem within Canadian law firms, and actually global law firms, because I'd say the phenomena is prevalent with the US and global firms I work with, is that it's a systemic, so I've talked to you about the blind spots and biases and the male normative, which I can talk about in more detail later, but let's talk about compensation. There's two systemic challenges happening on why it is that women partners get paid less than male partners. One is that it's based on hours billed. So when you bill more hours, you get paid more, essentially. And number two, you get credit for bringing in work. And so in the US, they call it origination credits. Similar concept here in Canada. So if you are the rainmaker in your firm, in that you attracted the big bank client or the oil and gas client or whoever into the firm, you will reap the benefits of that. Your piece of the partner pie will be larger.
Certainly from the men that I see, some of the challenges in the office I supervise at Sheridan, we see over 5,000 visits with our students. And with the males specifically, it's less about, they don't put their hands up. They don't engage with us like the females do in terms of that. I think that that's a problem in terms of that. They don't ask for the help when they need it. And when they do ask for help, it's too late in the game. So you're trying to find some options for them, and we can't really find that for them. So I think in terms of self-regulation, trying to find ways that students better understand themselves, I think this is where career guidance is critical. People for Education has done work on this and trying to figure out how do we provide better career guidance for all of our students, but specifically for men. I think we need to be thinking about this.
Is that what you do? Is that what an Associate Dean of Student Success does?
Other things in terms of that, certainly from looking at our student advisement operation, making sure that students, when they first come to Sheridan and getting their experience with us, they know what sort of supports that are available, and through that transition and adjustment phase, and thinking about, okay, if I'm in a program right now and I know I'm not necessarily engaged in that program, where do I go next? So the number one reason why students actually drop out of college is because they're not engaged in the program of choice, because they haven't engaged effectively in the career search process. And I think for men, I think that's really important. They focus on the dollars and cents behind when am I going to get a job, but think about from the aspect of where are my strengths, where can I go with that, and think about what I need to do next with that.
And those are all non-cognitive skills. So even knowing that you're not engaged, like even that, so the moment before that where you're going, oh, I think maybe I have a problem here, and knowing that you do, and being able to go and ask for help, those are vitally important foundational skills that everybody has to have. And there may be, for evolutionary reasons or for whatever, maybe girls have some of those skills, developed more. I think we also have to be careful that we're not, that one of the things that happened in our world is that we did encourage, we stopped discouraging girls, and then maybe some of those skills were able to come to the fore. So now that's why we see more of them in law and medicine and places like that than we used to. So it's not that we've done something terribly wrong in the education system, but now girls are able to find their place and use all of, and I hate saying this because it sounds sexist, but maybe that some natural, either evolved or learned or whatever skills that they have in those areas. But to me, the signal then is we've got to make sure we focus on those for boys too. So it's not that boys can't read because they can't read, or boys are just naturally disengaged, or boys even naturally hate school, but what we're not doing, in the kind of skewing or narrowing of education is going, we got to build these skills in everybody, and we got to build them way before they get to you. They've got to know those things in grade 2.
Right.
And we're doing work like that right now, and trying to build skill sets of students from the soft skills. And I hate that term, soft skills, because it's critical. It's critical from a future perspective, thinking about the types of skills. There's the technical things that we all think that education's about or training's all about, but those soft skills, those ability to get along with people, to understand who I am, where I fit in this world, are so critical to
Are
success.
boys being taught those skills at an early enough age right now?
I don't think it's talked enough, and certainly I think this is where mentorship comes in. I think this is where they get the connection to people who can make a difference in their lives. I think the role of parents in that is critical, but the role of teachers in that process is critical. The role of coaches around building those skills
and what's
are really
important in what you're saying is that they're not just like
natural attributes. It's not like you're just born with that. And they're not even, I don't particularly like the word character. They're not just part of who you are or your disposition. They're things you can learn. They are skills. You can learn them from grown-ups, from other people. And it's really important that we explicitly pay attention to those skills and recognize, again, exactly as you're saying, that these are the skills, you know, even though all of education isn't about employment, as your children get older, you realize you really care whether or not they have jobs, that these are employability skills, but they're also the skills that let you be an engaged citizen, that, you know, be a responsible person in the world.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety. They're on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.